Okay, so at any rate, the two examples I have, I want to offer them as being governmental and societal failures of a broken system. Currently, we're better off from acute medical conditions due to our pretty good medical systems for acute problems. But we're rapidly becoming worse off from chronic disease. And I think water quality degradations are a part of the increases in chronic diseases. As a bit of background, I grew up in South Eugene, roaming the South Hills, swimming and fishing in a lot of waters in Oregon. I moved into the Coast Range west of Eugene in 1977 and intensified my interest in water quality. I worked building log houses, stick houses, and commercial buildings. My family now has an organic experimental farm to seek crops for effective production in the Finger Valleys of the Coast Range. During middle school, I had fished extensively and lost a lot of lead fishing sinkers into streams and lakes. But in high school biology class, I began to question how that might poison the fish I loved to catch and eat. I switched to fishing with dry flies rather than use sinkers. At the U of O, I studied geology, biology, and biochemistry for a couple of years to try to learn what the toxicology research said about water pollution with the toxic metal lead that we put into the water, the fish, and our own bodies. The more I learned, the more I became alarmed. Now I live farming organically to increase local food production while learning how best to educate about water quality and toxicology. I hold an elected, non-paid position as a director of the Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation District for about 30 years now. My presentation today is as a private water quality advocate and not as any official representative. I try to learn every day, and I hope that you could all help me with that. I offer my opinion here to be taken with a grain of salt. I don't have any degree after my name, and some people have asked if I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm still not sure of their definition, but that's now not how I see it. So good luck seeking truth, right along with us all. Buyer beware, as always. Please save your questions, and I'll try to present quickly and allow for questions at the end. Question everything, as usual. And thank you all for the work you do for community and watersheds. Here in the Siuslaw, we collaborate with others to increase conservation of soil and waters to benefit us all in the watershed, all the residents, the trees, the fish, the elk, resident people, and visitors. What we learn here, we hope can help elsewhere. The Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation District collaborates with state and federal agencies to try to get funding and effort out on the ground for conservation. We've done a huge amount of work together, and I honor that work. These agencies do a lot of good work, but our biggest shortfalls come from big industry lobbies on the national level, obstructing work that might inhibit their profit at any cost paradigm. They pressure Congress unrelentingly for profit, or if displeased, threaten to withhold election funding that legislators are addicted to. This pervasive legislative fear by corporate income to the super rich is the devil in the details of damage to due diligence conservation effort. Legislators do not fund adequate environmental toxics contaminant monitoring that is needed to guide scientific integrity in conservation work. The work that we have done in spite of this massive shortfall of the system is amazing to me, a huge effort. But there is so very much left to do, and the salmon are still declining. Yes, the system currently functioning for water quality, toxic contaminant assessment fails us. Lack of good water quality assessment is a huge block to intelligent progress for our continuing effort. And your work helps us understand and underscore the need for the health of watersheds and those living in them. So I offer the two examples that are almost totally ignored by the broken system. These are only two of many. Example number one, I call legislators that fish. The rains that fall here from water evaporating off of the ocean, moving inland, dropping on us and through us. We are the water. Water is life. Evaporating from the Pacific, it's pretty clean and healthy, it seems. Condensing over us and falling, it picks up small amounts of air pollution, but likely still pretty clean. This is far better to start out with than the rain falling in most of the rest of the nation. And we have a lot of it falling here. As it rises up off the ocean, it picks up CO2 in the air, and it comes on shore, which makes it a little bit more acid as it picks up more CO2. And since CO2 is rising in the atmosphere around the globe, the rain tends to get even a little bit more acid through time. The rain is often around 5.6 pH, but mist and fog can gain enough CO2 to go even lower, approaching 4.2. Very acidic. The frequency and amount it rains here dissolves and carries the easily leached elements downstream to the ocean. It is typically significantly a bit acid. And what does acid do? It dissolves things. The frequency and amount it rains here dissolves and leaches the more easily leached elements and carries them downstream. This reduces the ability of our water to buffer the acid as much as water elsewhere does, dissolving metals that get into our streams faster than elsewhere. This lack of alkalinity or buffering capacity allows higher levels of many pollutants to be more toxic to stream organisms that support the salmoniid ecology. So even with less pollution going into our streams as trash, we get increased toxicity as a result. So even though we have lots of clean water falling here in the upper watershed mountains, we have a very important need to prevent metals from getting into the water. River mussels and snails are now having their shells dissolve prematurely, apparently causing more rapid population declines in some streams, likely attributable to the low levels of alkalinity in the stream getting slightly worse. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is who we think we hire to protect public from the toxic contaminants in our water. This agency and other water quality responsible agencies, both federal and state, are staffed by people like you and I that came out of the educational system eager to do good diligence work for keeping the water as clean as possible. but they are only allowed to do some of that. They're understaffed, underfunded, overworked. They do an amazing job of doing what they are allowed to do, but many are very frustrated about not being allowed to do more. The regulators of these water quality regulators are the legislators, who fund what can be done that they do not object to, but they do not fund to monitor, assess, design, and implement the protections necessary for clean water in our streams from toxic contaminants dissolved by the low alkalinity water. The industrial lobbies do not want funding to go to such monitoring. So the legislators fear loss of election funding for their jobs if they make too much trouble for industry by funding the needed levels of monitoring. And since monitoring with scientific integrity drives the scientific methodology necessary, we are flying blind in the assessment phases. This does not adequately inform the salmon restoration effort, or even more importantly, the health of the public. What the agencies are not allowed to do is the dangerous problem for water quality in Western Oregon streams. This is ultimately dangerous. We need to assess the stream areas of low alkalinity that are higher acid and map their extent, but the state will not fund this because it would lead to problems politically. You know, even probably better than I do, how it is the psychopathic greed for power by the richest 1% people in the world that does not allow adequate environmental protection from industrial toxic contaminants. It can't be done with scientific integrity of intent by anybody to any degree of adequacy. You all know this, or you wouldn't be here doing what you do. Yes, the system is broken and our society is getting sicker because of it. In spite of all the folk out there working hard to overcome these water quality health problems from toxic contaminants, it's still a huge problem. So now the meat of example one. The legislators that fish while ignorant of the unintended consequences of their fear for their elections. Did you know that when legislators take a little time off to take the kids or the grandkids out onto the lakes or rivers of Oregon to teach them to fish, that they very likely are poisoning those they love? This is very easily scientifically demonstrated. Danger. The tackle boxes become Superfund sites of fine pure lead powder coating the inside of the boxes. It gets on hands, on sandwiches, apples, fish mucus, cooler ice, and all equipment. Much of this gets back to the home and even to the frying pan. Did you know that just a single tiny lead fishing sinker split shot, when it dissolves, pollutes an Olympic-sized pool of water volume to violate water quality standards and to accumulate in bodies with exposures, causing chronic serious diseases? Do you know how many much larger sinkers have been lost into our waters to get ground up and dissolved? Beneficial uses of these waters get harmed, and people accumulate more lead in their bodies. Children swimming in these waters often make it a game of seeing how many lead sinkers they can collect. I have collected over 350 lost sinkers in 100 yards of a heavily fished stream. Did you know that when you handle lead objects, especially with wet hands, it does readily go through the skin? Authorities didn't used to think that it did, but in 1994, some scientists did some research that demonstrated that it did. It's just that the lead no longer had an affinity for the red blood cells. And so when they did the blood lead testing, it didn't show up as a result of exposure, but it does go through skin. And you can't wash it off effectively, even with most soaps. Soap usually makes it go into the skin even more readily. So you need to avoid skin exposure, just like you should for ingestion of lead particles or for inhalation. And also use gloves when working on your car batteries. Did you know that a lost lead sinker you lose into the stream gets ground up in riverine potholes? They're like the little mortar and pestle holes in the rocks. And that the small particulate dissolves much faster when it gets ground up. Did you know that you are poisoning the young salmon and making them less able to learn and feed effectively in the ocean? Or avoid predators as well? The science on all of this toxicology is well established. When lead gets into our acidic waters, subtle damage accumulates and we pay a big price. And salmon and supportive species pay a big price. The price is worse health and reduced abilities. And children can suffer IQ drops. So as far as I can say about the vast problems of toxic contamination getting into our waters and bodies, I offer this example as being typical of the ignorance of the broken system to grok the severity of the adverse effects. This is in spite of many well-intentioned of us really not knowing adequately how we all pollute the waters every day. I didn't know when I was fishing with sinkers what I was causing, and most of the people, the fishermen that I talk to now, don't understand this very well even yet. Yet the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and we all get sicker. The fishing regulations don't speak to this issue at all. And none of the water quality responsible agencies or the health authorities speak to this at all. And yet people have tackle boxes in their garage or in their boat that if they had gone to a hardware store and picked up a cheap lead swab test kit, it would tell them just how much lead pollution is in each of these tackle boxes. A lot of very educated, very dedicated people all around Oregon and Washington in agencies and environmental organizations are working very hard to help improve water quality and salmon habitat. But the politic will not fund adequate monitoring, assessment, and mitigation of these toxic contaminants. Work that is done on stream temperature, sediment loads, nutrient contents, and the like, those parameters are often worked on by all of these agencies, but not the toxics parameter. The environmental agencies do just enough toxics assessment to suggest that they can claim that they are adequate, but far from the reality in the field. They never mention the tackle boxes. We must somehow stop adding these contaminants to our waters, recognize them by monitoring, and implement projects for mitigation when they do get added to our waters. We are all responsible for that, and we can all help with that. I try to become aware enough to help with these tasks and to contribute my understandings as speaking truth to power about what is not getting done. We need to be questioning ourselves every step of the way. to be speaking the best truth we can. Honor all the good work being done, but know that it is not enough. Salmon still decline and we get sicker. All of the good work for water quality is not enough. The idea of profit at any cost, so widely practiced in the Western world, must get taxed. But the 1% will not allow this, yet the health of our brains depend on it. Continue to ask pointedly investigated questions of everybody, as you've been doing. It's so important. We have a distinct responsibility to speak about what we know, or we remain more another part of the problem rather than a part of the solution. So that's example one. Now, example two. Publicly owned railroad bridges over the Siuslaw River are massively contaminating low alkalinity waters of the state, yet no monitoring is allowed to happen by regulatory funding. 6 railroad bridges have been degrading severely and polluting the river that the young salmon must swim down through toward the estuary and ocean phase of their life cycle. There is a vast amount of research in lead toxicology that clearly demonstrates many adverse effects on young fish from the levels of pollution they must pass through. All over the US, the departments of transportation know the dangers of pure lead paint degradation risks when such old bridges are not maintained to prevent this type of pollution. Most railroad bridges are private ownership, but highway bridges have long been subject to regulations and work orders to repair or replace adequately to prevent pollution, especially over water. Not so with these railroad bridges. The manufacturers had stated the need to maintain them by painting every 4 years over the past 100+ years. But this has not been done, and the massive lead pollution is taking place in violation of the intent of the Clean Water Act and other protective regulatory language. The federal and state agencies look the other way, never testing adequately and never listing the pollution on the required 303D listings by the state to the EPA. The base coat of paint put over the top of the metal on these bridges is very high lead, 85 to 98% lead. And it was meant to be protective of the metal, so you wouldn't suffer structural decline. And that's only good as long as that lead paint stays on top of the metal and is protected by coverings of other paints. That hasn't been done. It'd be very easy to sample the runoff water washing off of these bridge members with all of the high quality sampling, quality assurance required. Yet that is never done by the state. The state has repeatedly been made aware of this pollution by private testing, strongly indicating the need for state testing to confirm these risks to water quality and to harms for many beneficial uses of the water. This includes for the ESA threatened coho salmon that must swim through the resultant pollution. One sample, private funding, at one point in time during one rain event for one pollutant, lead, at one location of bridge runoff water showed 16,000 times the 303D listing criteria when that water entered the low alkalinity river water. Just imagine that, 16,000 times their criteria. This was not a test sanctioned by the state, but a desperate attempt to get the state to do its own testing, to do due diligence for this obvious, blatant water quality risk. This testing was not likely taken at the worst potential hazard location to test either. For greater than 100 years, no official monitoring has taken place and the salmon population continues to decline. With many millions of dollars put towards salmon recovery, copious scientific literature pointing out the harms to fish, the total pollution assessment failure to monitor, even when advised of the risks for years, nothing is done. None of the water responsible or health responsible regulatory agencies have dared test these sites adequately for fear of punitive funding restrictions for some of the other good work that they do get done if they defy the edict by the politic to look the other way. Yes, the system is broken. Because of this looking the other way approach by the feds and state, fisheries managers are then not adequately informed to make appropriate decisions for planning and project implementation for salmon restoration efforts. All other states besides Oregon and Washington have essentially the same politic. And most states have far more total pollutant loads. So given these two samples, offered as educational points of view to clarify the status and trends of water quality in the low alkalinity watersheds of Western Oregon and Washington, yes, the system is broken by the politic of greed, not allowing the science to inform. All of the agencies do a lot of work that's beneficial and try to do due diligence toward these issues, but are prevented from adequacy by the power for greed at the very top of the wealth accumulation system. Now, you can probably pretty clearly see how this dynamic also misinforms not just the salmon restoration, but also misinforms agricultural assessment of toxics and irrigation water and on. What they are allowed to do for agricultural assessment for toxics is similarly bad. And then the whole medical paradigm is misinformed by this kind of pollution not being delineated. And the whole populace of voters and their kids who we borrow this world from. Poisoning children is not right. This is inadequate, dangerous, and a disease-generating breakdown in governmental responsibility. The ultra-rich are driving it all, and they're not getting adequately taxed for their crimes, in my humble opinion. So I guess end of rant. Thank you for your time and all of your effort. All comments will be appreciated, and if there are any questions, I could attempt to answer them now.
Wow, Ray. Lots of food for thought.
Yeah, just two examples. There's more.
But yeah, there's a couple more. I know. I think we could do like a year's internship with you. Yeah, I want to open this up to questions. I mean, I have a question initially. My first question is, you said something about our red blood cells don't have an affinity for lead. I don't know what that means.
Well, they know that the lead that usually comes in through ingestion or through inhalation is well known to go primarily into the blood cells, right? And so the testing that's been set up is designed to test the blood cells. Okay, so that's the standard test that everybody uses. But in 1994, it had been thought that since you test the blood of people that have had skin exposure, and it wouldn't show up in those cells. So they figured it was okay. It was okay to use lead in hair products, in working with fishing sinkers, working with lead batteries. You're all okay, good to go. But in 1994, two researchers discovered that that is not true, that it readily does pass through skin. And this is a huge deal.
Yeah.
So it meant that all these hair care products and the way that we deal with fishing and with, automotive work and all of that is exposing people, and it is going into bodies and presumably then into lymph and lymph nodes and likely harming the immune system in those areas from being as effective as it should be. So this has been confirmed by a lot of follow-up research now that yes, those two people were right. And as a side note, the Jen Stauber, one of the main researchers on it, could no longer get funding because she was making too many waves with the government by bringing this up. And so she went to Australia and got work out in the outback on wildlife, when she really wanted to work with human toxicology and to try to clarify these issues further. But other researchers had taken it up and said, yes, they're correct about that lead does go through skin, and that washing with soaps doesn't even take care of it usually. So it's another case of you have to prevent exposure by preventing that from being on your skin. And of course, inhalation of lead dust or lead fumes is even far worse because it gets into your lungs and can do a lot of damage that way. Or ingesting lead is a big problem. You can ingest, a child picks up about 50% of the lead that it ingests and puts it into the blood in the system and causes problems. But an adult is far less, 20% or so. But inhalation is almost 100%. So you don't want to breathe lead fumes. If you're making lead sinkers in your backyard, as a lot of people do, well, some people do, I've talked to, without any special hoods or anything, they're getting dosed pretty severely. But there's this kind of, inattention to detail all around us, and the agencies are not pointing this out adequately. It's criminal. So.
Thanks. David, you have a question?
Yeah, with lead shot from duck hunters, how big an issue do you see that as contributing to lead toxicity in streams? I know there's been an effort to coax hunters to use steel shot and not lead alternatives, but it sounds like it hasn't been that successful.
Yeah, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has done quite a bit, realizing that the research does show that this is a big problem. And so they, on the wildlife refuges, they have limited to steel shot rather than lead shot. Early on, back, I guess probably in the early 80s, there was a woman working for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality down in Coos Bay, Pam Blake, and I asked her about lead and issues and about the lead shot, because I thought that the estuary had probably been used for bird hunting a lot in the past. And she said, yeah, she says, it just blew me away when we took a meter of the muds and sifted it out, the phenomenal number of lead shot in those muds in certain strata down was just amazing to her, she said. And she thought that probably does have an effect on fish and other wildlife, at least at times.
More questions? There you go, Deb.
I guess one of the thoughts that was rolling through my mind as I listened to you, Ray, Roy or Ray? Ray?
Ray.
Okay. Was thinking about citizen science and how there are groups of people that are doing stream testing for temperatures and pH and different criteria. Is there any possibility that kind of a movement could take something like this on? I mean, are there groups that are like Friends of the Soyuz Law and Friends of the ALSI and who would be willing to step up and take some of the heat for the state?
Well, when you say heat, yeah, it's really heat, because these environmental quality responsible agencies put so many barriers in the way of anybody trying to look at things that they don't want to be looked at.
Mhm.
They set up protocols that must be followed that are just incredibly scientifically valid, but also designed to not allow just anybody to do the testing. So it's very difficult to do adequate quality assurance on the sampling that you do to make it something that could be held up for litigation, say. And so the Department of Environmental Quality and the EPA always want to have their work supposedly litigation ready. And so that means you have to have very stringent quality assurance protocols being done, which involves a lot of people and a lot of equipment and a lot of ultra clean sampling methodologies and all. And then they can find some little thing that they question and throw it out.
Sure.
And so when any organization does do this, they get stymied. And that's another thing to bring up, is that all of the agencies and all of the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that would normally, you would think, be able to take this kind of work on and do it adequately, if they were to seek funding to do it, then they're already receiving state and federal funds to do all the work they're doing anyway. And so they would be subject to getting those funds cut off, one way or another. It's very tightly controlled by the politic. And it's hard to break into that. I thought, I felt very depressed about this for many years now. And I thought, well, maybe the way to do this is to find the black sheep of the 1%. Find somebody that was dissatisfied with how the 1% does things and how the 1% is controlling all of this health stuff. And maybe they would front money to do some kind of testing like this on a pointedly investigative basis to all the quality assurance that would be needed and the money needed to do it. And then you could demonstrate maybe pretty clearly that a lot of these things are happening and get around the fences that all these agencies have built. That the agencies want to do the good work, but they're just limited. They can't. They won't get funded, or they'll get punitively hit for the work that they do get done. So it's quite a system, and it's very oppressive, and it feeds right into the whole medical paradigm problems with COVID and everything. There's a lot of science that does not get funded adequately because of the politic. And we're stuck that way here.
I would also add that I'm pretty certain that lead passes the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, yeah.
When we talk about damages, that it goes direct to the neurologic system.
Definitely. And in several ways, I'm very familiar with the research that demonstrates that.
Ray,
It's disheartening.
Ray, Chuck and Rob are waiting in queue.
Sure.
Yeah, Chuck, you want to go ahead?
Ray, thank you for all your work.
Yeah.
You know, are there any of the 50 states, is there any state that has a glimmer of hope that their agencies are doing something about this?
Yes. I believe Vermont and Maine have been pretty prominent in trying to do environmental lead control more. Their efforts, I believe, were what was behind a lot the industry and the NRA in taking their lobbying might to Congress. And 4 times now they have proposed legislation that would restrict the agencies being able to even look at lead as a toxic contaminant, that they would just politically X that right off the list. But it hasn't succeeded yet. And I don't know how much that has dampened Maine and Vermont or any other state from proceeding. But it's discouraging for sure. The science is there. The science is all over the place. It's there. And so many of these environmental exposures, like the bridges and the fishing sinkers, are just blatantly very high level pollutants. It's not a small thing that they have to spend 0.0004 detection limit to figure out. It's blatant. It's like 16,000 times their criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want to touch it because they know as soon as they do any monitoring, it's going to show the danger, and then they'll be forced to become, victimized by the politic and have consequences. So I don't know. It's a hell of an issue, but it's where we're at.
Thank you.
Wesley had his hand up before you, Rob, so I'm going to go to him and then you, then Rob. Yeah.
I feel like, we're hearing the same story that we heard about our initiative and so on, but you have a clog in the process. And I would raise for all of us, this is democracy in action. Is there something wrong with our democracy? Do we need a different form or a different way of working with the form? Because this is clearly murder on a legislative scale. And that shouldn't be happening in a true democracy.
Yes.
Well,
I'm
Wesley,
disappointed.
can I just say one thing, Ray?
Yeah.
Wesley, you've been around us long enough to know that we never say we live in a democracy. We do not live in a democracy. It would be we like to say it's a great idea and we ought to try it, but we don't know what that is because it's never been available to us. It's a corporatocracy or or something else, but it's definitely, we don't know what a true democracy is. And in a true democracy, it wouldn't be easy, it'd be messy, but it'd be worth a shot, because what we got going now is it's fraud.
It seems like the money at the top does buy the media, it buys the protocols, it buys the agencies, it buys, and I'm so worried that it will continually figure out how to buy the science.
Mm-hmm.
The funding is already very biased in what gets funded.
Mm-hmm.
But you look back in the work that's been done in the past in the scientific literature, and you can get some real gems out of that. It's still there. And I worry that they're going to find a way to shut that down.
Mm.
So, but that's getting way off track now.
Yeah, but it's right up our alley in community rights land.
Right.
Rob, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. Before my question, just to Wesley's question, which I thought you answered, Michelle. I think Gandhi was asked once what he thought of Western civilization, and his response was he thinks it would be a good idea. So I think the same thing. It would be great if we
Yeah.
had a functioning democracy. But my question actually, Ray, you probably are aware that we've done a lot of work on aerial sprays and so forth.
Yes. Mhm.
And a lot of that has to do with clear-cut logging, which is followed by the spraying of herbicides from helicopters. And a lot of our activists have wanted to be able to demonstrate sort of the pollution that goes on into the watershed as a result, because it gets sprayed, then it's ultimately runoff will get into the rivers and streams. But it's extremely expensive to try to test for that, to measure that. And you also have to test at the right time, because if you test when it's been sprayed a while ago, but there's been no rains, then it may not be having flushed into the water yet. I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to what a small underfunded group can do when this is a challenge that requires real investment, real technology, real resources.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I've worked in Deadwood with a lot of the grassroots local organizations trying to limit spray issues. And that's all the way back from the 70s with the CATS organization, Citizens Against Toxic Sprays. Local people here and from over the ridge in Five Rivers got together and tried to put a stop to it on the Forest Service lands. And they won some really good legal injunctions with the Forest Service on the issue, and the Forest Service, and as a result, stopped spraying. And so that always encouraged me a great deal, that work got done by those activists right from the get-go. But I think now the politic has shifted around enough that they've got defenses for that kind of grassroots action that are major. And I still think it's doable to go at it like the CATS group did and really pursue it in courts. I think it's possible to do on a scale that the state would have to pay more attention to rather than the federal government. And so that is encouraging. And I hope in the future that is able to come about better, because it's certainly a needed effort. It's the same looking away from the issues because of political, profit at any cost, obstruction that it causes. So yeah, it would be difficult. What maybe the best thing I've thought about for approaching a spray issue locally is to have a lot of potato plants started, little starts, scatter them all out around the perimeter of the spray unit. It's illegal for their sprays to go off unit. But obviously it does go off unit. So, if you could document that you have a high percentage of these plants in an area where the wind blew across it die, then you could take that vegetative material and have it analyzed. And probably the state and the feds would say it did not meet their protocols for litigation and everything. So therefore they wouldn't, allow it as entering their databases for actual pollution, but it may force them to look at the issue more closely and at least try to figure out other ways around the data. And so I thought maybe as a low cost thing to do by a group is you could do that. You could set out plants that could accept damage and accumulate the exposure and then test that. And you'd have something to present to the media, maybe.
It's a really
And the
interesting
media
idea.
is bought, so much by industry too, often. So what are you going to do?
Hey, Ray,
It's a
didn't,
really interesting idea though, testing with, cheap plants as opposed
Yeah.
to trying to do expensive, high-tech tests.
Right.
Ray, weren't you the one who told us about the vineyard somewhere near Crow that was decimated
Mhm.
and they sued and they lost?
Yeah, right.
So like, yeah,
Yeah, it's an elephant. And you'd have to eat it one bite at a time.
yep,
Uh,
yep, for real. Well, we can't, we have to keep fighting, that's for sure. We can't just lay down.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for people to hear this kind of information. I think just to be aware that it is happening and maybe be a little more careful about their exposures because of it. If you don't know sinkers are a problem and you
Right.
don't know the toxicology says it's probably contributing to your chronic rheumatism and your mental decline,
Robin, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if nothing else with those little potato plants, you could take them and have them really checked out to see exactly what toxins are in them, not just what they said they were going to spray,
exactly.
but what exactly was in them. And
Yes,
that could be an annoying point to take to the government.
yes, you could archive some of these sampling media like that. They do even make mechanical accumulators for air quality, that if you wanted to get more expensive and have more data that's worthy of somebody paying attention to it, you could get some of these samplers, air samplers, and put them out as well, and then have the media archived. So when you got money enough, you could have them analyzed, or but you'd have more to work with. There are ways of for small groups to actually work on this kind of a thing, but it's going to be expensive and it's going to be frustrating as all get out because of the politic.
Katie, you got a question?
Along the line of food, as like in potatoes, I'm just curious, your talk doesn't make fish sound very appetizing.
Well, yeah, I worked on one of the state panels, one of the commissions for the state needed to decide a little bit about how much fish is reasonable to eat from these polluted streams. And largely because the tribes were pushing the issue. The tribes on the Columbia pushed the issue.
Mhm.
So I thought it would be really good to be on this commission, to a working group, to try to help work out and maybe help move it more towards the tribes' stance. And they were saying that we eat a lot of fish and far more than most anybody else. And so we're worried that we're getting more toxins through the fish than what everybody else is. And so we're thinking we're being singled out for our lifestyle and discriminated against. And certainly they were right. But I was encouraged by the way that the working group talked it over and did make concessions about it, and did read a lot of the literature and the science, and did come to understand more that yes, we should change the allowable amounts from different water bodies in Oregon to make it more protective of people that eat a lot of fish. So they did that.
allowable amounts of poison.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah.
It's all a tragic comedy.
Yep. Savannah, you have a question? You are muted.
Thank you.
Mm.
Regarding the tackle boxes and lead sinkers,
Mhm.
I'm not clear on the tackle boxes being toxic. Is it because the lead sinkers are in it, or the tackle boxes themselves have lead in them?
Okay, no, okay, I should have made that clear. Yes, you know, there may be tackle boxes around that have contained their sinkers in little containers and everything, so they don't rub against the box. But my experience for all my life has been opening a tackle box and seeing those sinkers have been rolling around in there. And the lead is soft. It's malleable. It creates a powder really quickly.
Okay.
And that powder is all over in the box.
Mhm.
And if you use the lead check swab that the hardware store sells for checking paint on a house for lead, you can rub that in there and it turns bright red. You know, 99.
So who sells these lead sinkers?
Oh gosh, any big store you go into has an aisle full of lead sinkers. And like
Anybody that sells fishing supplies.
sporting goods stores, yeah.
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 I'm wondering if children could help us with that issue. If we can, like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and kids in school to get educated, and sometimes they are more powerful.
Oh yeah.
Addressing corporations, and that's the bottom line. If they can and make them into bad guy, and that they can have to stop selling them because they're hurting those children, et cetera, et cetera. If kids know about this, sometimes they're real effective. I wonder if we can't address that.
Yeah, and if the kids could go, as a delegation or something to different legislators and say, hey, look, do you teach your grandkids to fish? What's your tackle box like? Are you poisoning your grandkids when you take them out fishing? If a child was saying that, maybe the legislator would actually go, oh my, maybe I have been.
Well, and I think kids can go directly to stores, to big stores, and they use social media. They get a lot of public kind of advertising and exposure through the internet, and kind of the court of public opinion, rather than legislature, because that just seems to be a black hole. Those people,
indeed,
they don't serve their children.
Right.
And we can appeal to those people's grandchildren, and I don't think they have a heart to even think about their grandchildren. But I think that kids can make a difference in what people will buy.
Yes, I think that's a good angle to work on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how to go about doing that, and if anybody would be interested in working with me on something like that.
Yes, I would hope so. Yeah, a young person, I would hope.
I mean, is anybody here interested in talking to Savannah later about something like that? I mean, I think it's throwing spaghetti at the wall time. We're just gonna try whatever. If someone has an idea, like grab somebody else and build upon it. I don't have a whole lot of faith in but I'm not sure that even sweet little kids would be able to go to a store and have a store say no to their bottom line. And I don't think at the legislature you're going to find a whole lot of that either, because it's still the corporate privilege that allows us to that allows them to walk away with the money and leave us with the harm.
Plus, it's not it's not them necessarily either. It's also anybody that fishes, is kind of biased to not looking at this issue
Mhm.
unless they're fly fishing or, and know about the lead issue. They're going to be slapped in the face with this issue and go, oh my God, the environmentalists are, hitting on us again about this. And I'm
Yeah.
going to defend my right to fish
Yeah,
however I want, so there's going to be reactions that are pretty strong from that sport fishing group too. I was hoping that maybe the sport fishing group would begin gradually going, oh, maybe we better find a different thing to weight our lines with.
Yeah. how
and
hard-
just because there's science that says lead is harmful, there's also people who really think that the EPA has our back, and the EPA would not allow lead sinkers at Fred Meyer or at the Sportsman or wherever, because they're, we're just alarmists. We're the people who are nervous about things that we shouldn't be nervous about.
Yep.
Robin's
Robin,
trying to
you-
get in. Yep.
Robin?
I just wanted to say that as far as children, Savannah, there's been a lot of young people who have been in the face of a lot of legislators about guns lately. And has it
Yeah.
made any difference at all? I don't think so.
Oh,
But
man.
on the other hand, I mean, I'm thinking I might just write a letter to the editor about this, because I mean, I didn't know about any of this.
That's another lead issue too, by the way.
Of course.
Shotguns.
Yeah, or any kind of gun, usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll go ahead, Deb.
I was just having a dream here about wondering if there are any agencies like ODFW who say that they love fish and wildlife and want to save them and blah, blah, blah. If any of them have any ability to stand up and say, this is bullshit. I mean,
Yeah.
is it possible to motivate people who are working within the system?
A lot of them are motivated already. They already know the issue.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They just feel that their jobs are at stake. That they might find their jobs gone if they make waves and the legislature doesn't approve of it. It's oppressive. It's very
Is
oppressive.
there a whistleblower to be done here? And
Yeah.
do whistleblowers have
Some whistleblower, somebody that's about to retire, or who knows, but it's known. It's a known problem. It's just not well enough known to be put out there and have media take it over and try to educate about it.
And
So-
I also was thinking about Chuck's question about, are there any states doing anything? And if
Mhm.
those two states started to have people joining their process, and
Right.
say, we support what they're doing. I mean, is there a way of lighting a fire under this United States and the people?
California had done some work around condors and eating gut piles from hunters that had lead in them, and all the condors were getting poisoned, and so were the eagles by that, and so the state Department of Fish and Wildlife, or whatever it is down there, did have to do something, and they did involve legislation, and they did get some things done down there. So I had hopes that maybe Oregon and Washington could go together and kind of say, yes, this is a big problem of lead in the environment, and kind of piggyback on with California and trying to get some mass behind the effort. But I haven't heard that it's produced any mass behind the effort.
Thomas, you got something?
Oh, I was going to try to chime in. First of all, Savannah, I always support people trying to speak to kids and youth. As far as one of the ones taking the bullets for the small progress we can make, and I would encourage you just to always think about what small progress you can make instead of worrying about the whole Trump era that's kind of crippled us. Those of you that are going to be in town in Eugene, there's a parade going to be happening. I threw some stuff in the chat about that. There's also a J.H. Baxter review going to happen. I was actually the one that did the environmental testing for that. that helped close them down.
Mm,
I used the opportunity. We didn't even prove the heavy metals issue, which you guys are talking about. We just proved, and actually the thing is what crippled them isn't actually something that should have crippled them. All we could prove is that there was the same toxins in our ground around there that come out of diesel. So all of our economy basically produces this diesel, and that's why it showed up over by the railroad tracks as well. We have diesel railroad engines. So that same toxin is everywhere. But for some reason, I was able to basically use it to support more investigation and more looking into J.H. Baxter, which ended up giving a focus for DEQ that kind of closed them down, or at least impinged on their profitability. They're not fully closed down, and everyone needs to be aware of the pole facility that's happening out off of Green Hill on the railroad there, just off of West 11th by the wetlands. There's industry is still going to try to push and find ways to produce those kind of things, but those same water treated wood ties and poles all go into our water systems as well. While there's supposed to be better versions of it, the treatment these days that are more aquatic related, the old stuff is still in our waters. It has chrome, all kinds of bad stuff, and we're not even looking at that part of things. So anyway, I'm also involved with Common Goods Network, which helps try to fund some of these projects and could basically sponsor some of this research that you guys are talking about. It's a matter of getting us all together, because $5 across Lane County alone is $1.7 million. There's nothing we can't do if we can get our $5 coffee and bring us together. So don't don't give up yet.
No, we're not giving up. Brenda, you have something?
A quick comment. As I was listening to Ray and others discussing, what's being done, if anything, and what's not being done in Oregon, I did a quick Google search on my phone on lead toxicity testing, rivers and streams in Oregon. I couldn't find anything, but there was an article that came up in Washington State saying that starting in 2018, they started testing rivers and streams. They had 15 different sites that they tested in the spring and fall for several cycles. And that's as far as I got. So at least we know that maybe Washington State would have some data, or would be someone to partner with.
Yeah, Oregon had quite a bit of data from 70s and 80s. That to me seemed pretty important to have as background data, though it became a question with the Department of Environmental Quality that, well, this was done before our protocols, our sampling protocols were adequate, and so we're going to disregard all that data. So they threw it all out as outliers. And so that kind of wiped clean a lot of the work that had been done in the past. And how much political that was or not, I don't know.
Right.
But
Excuses.
Yeah. It's just what you got to work against. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're at 7:30, which is about 30 minutes longer than we normally spend together, but this was clearly really important, and there's more to it. Testing or not, we know that the corporate boys are getting away with murder. And so from where we sit in this community rights mentality, we have to stop corporate harm and exposing and challenging this rigged system. So if by chance our Protect Lane County Watersheds initiative was successful and we passed it, that would be one step closer to shutting down harmful practices. You can't do all that stuff if the people say, this is, if we lived in a democracy, and the people say, we don't want to do this, you know, Deb over there is thinking, yeah, that's what we said, and then we didn't get what we said. You know, it's a long slog up a tall hill, and we just have to keep moving on up the hill, not giving up. I don't, you know, we don't really have that luxury.
Got to do something.
Got to do something, and not until we get what we know we want and deserve, and our kids' get what they want and deserve, we ain't stopping. So next month, May the 3rd, Monday of the month, we will be talking about land acknowledgements and land back, and considering another big topic. Check your, you know, down at the bottom of the chat are 3 dots, and you can actually copy everything that's in the chat. So before we say goodbye, find those 3 little dots. And if you don't have them, you can always contact community rights in, you know, either through our website, Facebook, emails, and we'll hook you up. Sure,
I just have a quick question. What time does the Earth Day parade start?
that's Thomas. You got something, Thomas?
Yeah, I just got to unmute myself. Basically, it's in the chat, but it's 1 p.m. The actual parade starts. People are arriving about 12:30, 12:40.
Okay, thank you.
Federal building, the old federal courthouse, not the new one.
Right.
All right, good people, take some good care and enjoy what's good.
And thank you, Ray,
Thank you,
so
Ray.
much.
Thanks
Great.
again, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
Yes.
all for your work.
Excellent presentation. Appreciate
Big
it.
love, Ray. Thanks
Thank you,
again.
Ray.
See ya.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Night.
Night, everybody.